Imagine this. You come across a vintage sports yearbook, and right away, it hooks you. One, the cover looks great. The colors feel right. It has that old school feel that instantly pulls you in. For that first second, you're sold. Two, now you're leaning in. You're looking closer. And for a moment, it feels like you found something special, something nostalgic, something authentic, something that really belongs in your collection. Three, then the details start to hit you. The logo was wrong for the era. The font feels off. The names don't match. And just like that, you're out. The illusion is gone. The feeling is gone. And what looked good for 3 seconds doesn't feel good at all anymore. Because in a hobby built on details, 3 seconds is long enough to get your attention, but it should never be long enough to earn your trust. This is the Tabletop Sportcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tabletop Sportcast, where we talk about the games, the projects, and the stories that make this hobby so much fun. This is a show about sports, tabletop gaming in all of its forms, replaying the past, building something fictional, exploring new ideas, and celebrating the creativity that keeps us all coming back to the table. I'm your host, James Cast, and today, episode 246, we're diving into a topic that I think is becoming more and more important in this hobby. The title of this episode is Stop the Slop, and the heart of the conversation is pretty simple. Just because something is fast, polished, or easy to generate does not mean it is good. In a hobby built on details, care, and authenticity, we need to have a better eye for the things that look great for 3 seconds, but don't hold up once you actually examine them. So today I'm going to count down 10 things we all need to be on the alert for if we want to use AI as a tool without lowering the standards that make this hobby special. But before we get there, let me take a quick look back at last week's episode. Episode 245, the 2024 Mets retrospective. That was a really enjoyable episode for me because it gave me a chance to reflect not just on the replay itself, but on everything that made the 2024 Mets season so memorable in the first place. The awful start, the turnaround, the energy that built around that team, and the storylines that made that season feel so alive. And one thought that really stood out to me afterward is that my replay, in a lot of ways, flattened out the ride. The real Mets season had those dramatic swings, those phases, those emotional highs and lows that define the year. But in a tabletop replay, we're usually working from cards built on the full season picture, not on the week-to-week or month-to-month version of a team. So in some ways, that smoothing out is exactly what we should expect. And I think that's part of what makes replay projects so interesting. They can reflect the truth of a season without always reproducing the exact emotional path that got a team there. And speaking of what's happening around the hobby, let's go ahead and turn the page to Around the Table. I've got a few things to talk about there, including the release of Matchup College Basketball, one of my weekly highlights, and another conversation that has been happening lately. And with that, let's go around the table. One of the bigger conversations around the hobby lately has been the release of Matchup College Basketball from St. Patrick, and especially around the entry price point. The fact deck came in at about $103, and then there's a spiral-bound rule book that is $35, I think, although there is a PDF option for the rules. So, they have the option there. But the bigger hurdle is that the fact deck is not really optional. And from there, gamers are still going to need to purchase sets if they want to really get into the game. So I think it's fair to recognize that for some people, that's going to be a barrier. Cost matters. Every gamer has to decide for themselves whether that entry point feels worth it based on their budget, their level of interest, and how much value they think they'll get out of the game. At the same time, I also think it's important not to judge other people for the choice they make. Some people may look at that and say, no way. And some may decide it's totally worth it. Both of those reactions are valid. And we really don't know enough about someone else's financial situation to make that call for them. For me personally, I'm still going to pick up the game. I'm still really excited about getting it on the table. And I will, align with some of the arguments that some folks have made where sometimes I'll just justify those higher price points by thinking about what does it mean in the long term. This is a game I intend to have for the next 10, 20 years, and I'll get lots of plays out of it. So yeah, it's a little bit more of an upfront cost, but over the long haul, I will be able to play it for free, in a sense, for many years to come. So that's usually the approach that I'm going to take. But again, I totally understand both sides of that argument. Another hobby conversation I've seen lately has to do with digital utilities and whether designers need to think more about helpers, trackers, and other tools that people use alongside their tabletop games. And on that one, I do have a pretty clear opinion. Tabletop designers are designing tabletop games. And if the goal is to create a strong tabletop experience, then I don't think it should automatically fall on a designer to also make digital support easier for the rest of us. Now, sure, there are probably accessibility arguments to be made, and that could honestly be a whole show by itself. In fact, this whole topic could be a whole show by itself, and maybe at some point in the near future. But at the end of the day, if someone designs a game for tabletop play, I think the intent is for people to experience that game on the tabletop with all the tactile parts of that the hobby offers with that. And if we decide to build from there with spreadsheets, utilities, or digital helpers, that's our choice. I just don't think it should always be the designer's responsibility. And for my weekly highlight, I do want to go to the 1975-76 ABA co-op, where I recently played the San Antonio Spurs at the New York Nets. And this was a game from January 2nd, 1976. And I was using bank shot basketball once again. This was a really fun one because it turned into a tight game with multiple lead changes in the fourth quarter. San Antonio dug itself a huge hole and was down 19 at halftime, but was able to fight all the way back to make it a game. Part of the reason they went down early was that Billy Paltz, their center, and George Gervin, their small forward, both ended up getting into foul trouble early and had to sit for a good portion of the second quarter. And New York really took advantage of that. But they stormed back in the third quarter, mostly while, Dr. J was taking a little break. And speaking of Dr. J, he was the real story here. Julius Erving put the Nets on his back, scoring 43 points and locking down 21 rebounds. And that kind of stat line tells you everything you need to know. In a game where San Antonio stormed back at halftime and made the fourth quarter a battle, it was Erving who still found a way to be the biggest force on the floor. And that's the kind of replay moment you remember. All right, let's get into today's main topic. So with that in mind, we're going to get into the list that I put together. And again, these are 10 things people in our hobby need to be on the alert for when using AI, especially if we want to train ourselves to look past that first 3-second impression. Because the real test is not whether something looks good right away. The real test is whether it still holds up once you slow down, look closer, and actually think about what's in front of you. So here's our Stop the Slop top 10. And we'll start with number 10. You have a retro look without real era feel. So this is when something gives off that vintage vibe at first glance, but then the deeper you look, the less authentic it feels. The colors, the fonts, the textures, or the layout may suggest an older era, but they do not actually reflect the design language or the details of the time that they're trying to imitate. Number 9, you have context bleed and prompt carryover. So let's face it, AI has a tendency to drag pieces of one conversation into the next, even when the topics should stay separate. And if you're not careful, your ideas, the tone, the names, the assumptions from a previous prompt can start bleeding into your new work. And that usually creates some strange results that do not really belong there. At number 8, we have this issue of template sameness in logos, uniforms, and design. One of the biggest traps with AI design is that everything can start to look like a variation of the same idea. If you're looking at stuff in every logo or jersey or layout, you tend to lean on the same shapes, the same font styles, basically that same design formula. That's not really originality. It's sameness dressed up as creativity. Number 7, false variety in fictional names, lists, and generated content. At first glance, AI can make a list look deep and complete, but a closer look often reveals repetition hiding underneath. The same first names, the same last names, and the same patterns start showing up over and over, creating the illusion of variety without the realism that good fictional content needs. At number 6, you have impossible dice, broken components, and tabletop details that make no sense. And this is where the image may look fine overall, but the actual gaming details start to fall apart. You see dice and they have the wrong numbers or the wrong number patterns. You look at the pips and those are not adding up. They're not things we recognize. They have the wrong patterns or the wrong totals. Components don't really resemble anything that we typically use on the tabletop. And in fact, the whole tabletop scene just starts to reveal that the tool does not actually understand the objects that it's trying to depict. Now we get to number 5, where you have polished copy and empty meaning. So AI is very good at producing words that sound smooth, polished, and complete, even when they're saying very little. In our hobby, that can show up in blurbs, in bios, and descriptions, or articles that sound good for a moment, but do not offer much specificity, insight, or real voice. At number 4, we trust AI facts without checking them. And this is one of the biggest mistakes people make, assuming that because AI sounds confident, it must also be correct. This is a hobby built on stats, on history, seasons, and details. So trusting AI without verifying the facts is a fast way to let bad information slip into your work. Now we get to number 3. You have fake details that sound right at first glance. Sometimes AI does not just get something wrong. It invents something that feels believable enough to pass for truth. And that's especially dangerous because a made-up stat, a publisher, player detail, or historical note can sound perfectly reasonable until somebody with knowledge stops and checks it. You'll hear this most often referred to as hallucinations. All right, at number 2, we have people who are, or I should say, the unlicensed use of protected logos, uniforms, and brand IP, intellectual property. Just because AI can generate a familiar logo or uniform does not mean you should use it. When people start dropping protected team marks, league branding, or copyrighted visual identity into their projects without permission, they're stepping into legal and ethical territory that should not be brushed aside. And then my number 1 pitfall is letting AI be the creator instead of the collaborator. And this is the biggest issue of all, because it sits underneath many of the others. AI can be a great starting point, but when the tool becomes the creator and the human stops shaping, refining, questioning, and bringing their own voice to the work, that's when the slop really starts to take over. So that's my list. That's the top 10 pitfalls. Think about those ideas a little bit more and really put it into that context of that 3-second eye test, because a lot of those things will look good instantly. But once you make it past that 3 seconds, that's when you start to see these breaking down. And the more I think about this topic, the more I realize that this really isn't an anti-AI conversation for me. It's a standards conversation. Because the truth is, I'm not coming at this from a place of fear. I'm coming at it from a place of care. I care about this hobby. I care about the people in it. I care about the quality of the things we create, share, post, and put out into the world. And the more I see AI show up in our space, the more I think we need to be honest about something. Easy is not the same thing as better. And right now, I think too many people are accepting easy. This is a hobby where our community has always had a pretty sharp eye. We notice details. We notice when a logo feels off. We notice when a player bio sounds generic. We notice when a stat line doesn't quite add up, when an image falls apart under a second look, or when something that is supposed to feel historical just doesn't feel grounded in the right era. That attention to detail is part of what makes this hobby great. It's part of what makes the people in this hobby so thoughtful, creative, and invested. So what concerns me is not just that AI makes mistakes, because of course it makes mistakes. The tools themselves warn you about that all the time. No, what concerns me is how quickly people are willing to accept the output anyway. Something looks good for 3 seconds and that becomes good enough. Something sounds polished and that becomes meaningful enough. Something comes fast and that becomes valuable enough. But when you slow down and really look at it, a lot of it just doesn't hold up. That's the slop. And I think one of the biggest dangers here is that sameness starts getting mistaken for creativity. Look around. You see it in the logos people design. You see it in the uniforms people design. You see it in the fictional names and the generated writing. The structure will change a little. The colors might shift a little. Maybe even the wording gets a little bit of a remix. But underneath it all, it's the same design language. It's the same rhythm, the same patterns, the same emptiness, wearing a different coat. That's not creativity. That's repetition. Real creativity has personality. It has intention. It has point of view. It reflects choices. It reflects taste. It reflects the creator. And that is where I think this matters for our hobby. Because this hobby has never just been about output. It has always been about connection. It's about the joy of making something, shaping something, refining something, researching something, replaying something, sharing something. It's about caring enough to get the details right, or at least caring enough to try. And when we start letting AI do too much of the creating, I think we risk losing some of that. Not all at once, not dramatically, but little by little. We lose our voice, we lose originality, we lose trust. And once the trust starts to erode, the engagement follows it. Because when people start seeing too much content that feels hollow, unchecked, recycled, or machine smooth, they start pulling back. They stop leaning in the way they used to. They stop engaging with the same excitement. They stop assuming the things in front of them were made with care. And that matters because community is built on trust. Community is built on people believing there's a real person on the other side of the work. A real person with ideas, standards, taste, and something worth saying. That's why I keep coming back to this idea that AI should be a collaborator, not a creator. In fact, you should probably almost think of it as sharing your byline with AI instead of owning it yourself, especially when AI has done most of the work. I think AI can be really useful. I mean, I really do. I use it every day. I have said that before, but I use AI tools every single day. I think it's great to help you get started. I think it can help you brainstorm. It helps me push through a blank page. It helps me organize a thought or test my ideas. And there's real value in that. But there is a big difference between using AI to help build something and letting AI replace the part of the process that should still belong to you. That part is your voice. It's your judgment, your editorial eye, your willingness to say, this isn't good enough yet. Because at the end of the day, AI does not care whether the logo feels original. It doesn't care whether the stats are right. It doesn't care whether the writing actually means anything. It does not care whether a fictional league has its own personality or whether a historical image actually fits the era, or whether the names on a list feel real. That part still belongs to us. And I think that's really what I'm arguing for here. I'm arguing for effort I'm arguing for discernment. I'm arguing for us all to have higher standards in a hobby that deserves them. Because once we start accepting slop as normal, we don't just lower the quality of the content. We lower the quality of the space around it. We make it harder to trust what we see, harder to feel inspired by it, harder to connect with it. And over time, that doesn't strengthen the hobby, it weakens it. So yes, use the tools, explore them, learn them, push them, see where they can help, but don't hand over the keys. Don't confuse fast with thoughtful. Don't confuse polished with meaningful. Don't confuse same with creative. And don't let the convenience lower the bar in a hobby that has always been at its best when people cared enough to bring something real to the table. In the end, stop the slop. So as we wrap things up today, I think the biggest takeaway is this. I do believe AI has a place in our hobby. These tools can be incredibly useful when they're used the right way. They help you brainstorm, they organize your ideas, and I really feel like the biggest thing is they get us past that blank page sometimes. They can help you move a project forward faster than you might on your own. And there's real value in that. But the value is not in letting the tool think for you, create for you, or lower standards for you. The value is in using AI with intention, with discernment, and with your own personal standards still fully in place. So yes, use AI if it helps you. Let it get you started. Let it help you build momentum. But don't stop there. Bring your own voice to it. Bring your own judgment to it. Bring your own standards to it. This is a hobby that's built on details, care, creativity. And the question is not whether something looks good for 3 seconds. The question is whether it still holds up once you really look at it. And maybe that's the ask coming out of this episode. The next time you see something AI generated in this hobby, maybe it's the next time you create something yourself, take that extra second look and ask a few harder questions. Is this accurate? Is it original? Does it have meaning? Does it actually reflect the care that I should be putting into this? And just as importantly, let's be willing to challenge each other in the hobby too, respectfully. Because having a high standard doesn't just mean holding yourself accountable. It also means being willing to encourage better standards from the people around you. We're not here to tear anybody down. We're here to protect the quality, the trust, and the creativity that make this hobby worth being part of. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, there's a few great ways to support the show. Check out Tabletop Sportcast on the Facebook, where I share my updates, episode posts, and more conversation around the hobby. You can also support the show through Patreon, which helps me continue creating the content and growing what we do here. And if you ever want to reach out directly, you can always send an email. I always enjoy hearing what people are playing, what projects they're working on, and what topics they'd like to hear covered on the show. And of course, one of the best ways to help the podcast is simply to share it with another gamer who loves this hobby as much as you do. I also want to mention my other podcast, the Play Nation podcast, where we focus on play games and the projects, people, and conversations that surround that corner of the hobby. And if you prefer to follow the shows on video platforms, both the Tabletop Sportcast and the Play Nation podcast can also be found on YouTube. Next time on the Tabletop Sportcast, I'm going to do something a little more personal and reflective, an episode called Why I'm Choosing Gaming Right Now. And that conversation is going to be about prioritization, where my time and energy are going, and why, at least for this season, my game design work is taking a bit of a backseat to gaming and content creation. I think it'll be an honest look at where I am in the hobby right now, and I hope it's one that connects with some of you as well. But until next time, keep enjoying the games, keep enjoying the hobby, and as always, thanks for listening.